Welcome to our deep dive, and today we're tackling something pretty close to my heart, actually, writing with style. We've got a stack of excerpts here from the Elements of Style, and, well, to be honest, can be a bit dry.
It can be,
Yeah,
yeah.
so we'll be distilling those key insights, those
hmm
aha moments to help you write more effectively, and maybe even, with a touch of flair.
Yeah, definitely. That's what we'll be doing, extracting those golden nuggets from these excerpts, focusing on usage and composition, and even kind of delving into different writing
Oh,
styles.
I'm excited to get into that. And I know you always bring a fresh perspective to this. The workbook, it jumps right into possessives. I think this is something a lot of people get tripped up on.
It is, it is.
Yeah.
And the basic rule, though, is pretty straightforward. You just add jums for singular possessives, even if the word ends in S.
Okay.
So like Charles's friend or Burns' poems.
Yeah, even if it kind of hisses at you and you say it out loud, you just tack on that stance.
You do.
But then there are exceptions, right?
Oh, of course, there are always exceptions.
You mentioned something about ancient names.
Yes. For ancient names, especially those ending in S or S, we actually drop that extras. I think Moses's laws or Isis's temple.
Might see.
And these little, I guess, quirks are fascinating because they kind of show how language evolves over time, adapting to our usage.
It's so true. It's like it is a living thing, always changing.
It is, yeah.
Okay, let's move on to another punctuation puzzle. Commas. I think this is something I always have questions about.
Oh, yeah. Commas can be tricky.
The workbook talks about using them in a series before conjunctions that are linking independent clauses
Yeah.
and also around non-restrictive phrases.
Right.
Is there an example that really sticks out to you?
There's one that I really like, actually. It really shows the difference between the audience, which had at first been indifferent, became more and more interested, versus the candidate who best meets these requirements will be hired. So in that first sentence, the part about the audience being indifferent is kind of extra information. It doesn't change which audience we're talking about, and so that's why we use commas. It's almost like a little pause or a little aside.
Okay.
But in that second sentence, the part about meeting the requirements, that's essential. It helps us understand which candidate we're actually talking about.
I see. So those commas are they're like little side roads.
Yes, exactly.
We can take them for a little extra information,
Right.
but they don't derail us from our main route.
Yeah, they don't change the main meaning of the sentence.
Okay, let's move on to the dreaded comma splice. I know I've definitely been guilty of this one.
Well, we all have. We all have.
The workbook is very clear about this. Don't join independent clauses with just a comma.
Nope. It's like, imagine trying to build a house using glue instead of nails.
Oh, okay.
It might look okay from a distance, but it's not going to be structurally sound.
Right.
If you use a semicolon instead of a comma, you're creating a much stronger link.
Right. So like instead of saying it was getting late, we decided to head home.
Right.
We'd say it was getting late, we decided to head home.
Exactly.
It's like we're adding an extra support beam to the sentence.
Precisely.
Okay. And speaking of sentences that need a little bit of structural support, let's talk about fragments.
Yes.
I love that analogy the workbook uses.
Yeah.
The sentence as a machine.
It's a great analogy. A sentence, like a well-oiled machine, needs all its parts to function properly.
Yes.
And a fragment's missing a key component.
Right.
Either the subject or the verb.
Yeah.
And that leaves the reader kind of hanging, like waiting for something that's not there.
It's like trying to start a car with a missing spark plug.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's talk about something that can go hilariously wrong in writing. Dangling modifiers. I feel like this is something that the workbook kind of has fun with.
Oh, the unintentional humor they can create. There's one example that always makes me chuckle. Being in a dilapidated condition, I was able to buy the house very cheap.
So, wait a minute. You were dilapidated.
That's what it sounds like, right?
That's a funny picture.
Yeah.
I guess it highlights how important it is to attach those modifiers to the right subject, to the right noun.
It really is. It's all about being mindful of how our words connect. Otherwise, we risk creating confusion or even a good laugh, maybe at our expense.
And nobody wants their masterpiece to turn into a comedy routine.
Yeah.
Let's talk about creating a dynamic read. The workbook really emphasizes the importance of sentence variety.
Yes, and this is something that really that I connect with. It's about using different sentence lengths, different structures. It creates this rhythm, this flow in our writing.
Right.
Short sentences can deliver a punch. Long sentences allow for, more nuanced exploration of ideas. It's
Yeah.
kind of like composing a piece of music. You need those staccato
Oh, I love
notes.
that.
But you also need those flowing melodies to create interest.
Yeah, I love that analogy. And just like, musical phrases are grouped into measures, sentences are grouped into paragraphs.
They are, yeah.
And those paragraphs, each one should have its own internal unity and purpose, right?
Exactly. The workbook calls it the law of unity, dictating that each paragraph should focus on a single topic.
Okay.
And every single sentence within that paragraph contributes to its development.
It's like you're building a house.
Yeah.
You need a strong foundation. That's your topic sentence.
Right.
Then you've got your solid bricks, which are your supporting sentences.
Yes.
And then a sturdy roof, your concluding sentence.
Exactly.
I remember that example from the workbook about Benjamin Franklin's boyhood. It shows how even seemingly, well-written paragraphs can benefit from taking out those sentences that kind of stray from the main point.
Yeah, it's a good reminder to be ruthless editors of our own work.
Oh, absolutely.
Sometimes we get so caught up in the flow of writing that we lose sight of what the paragraph is really about.
I'm totally guilty of that.
We all are. We all are.
Now, I'm curious about, how a writer's personal style kind of comes into play when we talk about different writing purposes. The workbook mentions narration, description, exposition, and persuasion.
Right.
And
And each purpose kind of demands a slightly different approach. And that's where a writer's individual voice can really, shine through. Think about narrative and descriptive writing, for example. Using strong verbs, vivid adjectives, and even dialogue can bring a story to life, make the reader feel like they're right there in the scene. And one example that always sticks with me is Dickens's description of Jacob Marley's ghostly visit. The way he uses specific details like a frosty rim on Marley's head, his grating voice.
it's like he's painting a picture with words.
He is, he is. And it creates such a tangible sense of this character.
It makes me want to go back and reread Dickens just to kind of appreciate those skills, his descriptive skills.
Oh, absolutely. He was a master.
And speaking of strong word choices, the workbook is a huge advocate for using active voice whenever possible.
Yes, and for good reason. Active voice injects energy and clarity into your writing. It really puts the actor front and center, makes it immediately clear who is doing what. Passive voice, on the other hand, can sometimes feel a bit weak and roundabout.
Right. It's like the difference between saying the ball was hit by the boy and the boy hit the ball.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
The active voice just makes it so much more direct, impactful. Remember, the workbook gave several examples of how rewriting those passive sentences to be active just made them so much more lively.
Yeah.
That's all about getting rid of that unnecessary wordiness.
Exactly. Make it punchy.
And I think this ties directly into into what we've been talking about, the workbook's emphasis on using definite, specific, concrete language.
Yes. Abstract language can feel vague and distant, while concrete language really brings your writing to life with vivid imagery.
It's the difference between saying the food was delicious
Yeah.
and actually describing the specific flavors, the textures that made it so delicious, right?
Exactly. Show, don't tell.
Show, don't tell. One example that always comes to mind is from the workbook about describing a surfer's experience.
Right.
Instead of simply saying it was exhilarating, the writer should actually describe the feeling of the wind whipping through their hair, the spray of the ocean on their face, the rush of adrenaline as they're riding that wave.
Exactly. Those specific details, that's what makes writing memorable and engaging.
It's about those details, and I think those details become even more powerful when we start to think about word placement. The workbook talks about the importance of placing key words or phrases at the end of a sentence for maximum impact.
It's like, building suspense in a good story. You hold back that most important information until the very end, keep the reader on the edge of their seat.
Oh, it's like the grand finale of a fireworks show.
Yes.
You save the biggest and brightest explosion for last. Okay, this is where I think things get really exciting. We're going to talk about different writing styles. I find this so fascinating.
Oh, it is fascinating.
The workbook introduces all these different writing styles: forcible, vehement, elegant, even feeble. I'm curious. I'd love to get your take on a few of these. Let's start with forcible style.
Okay, so forcible style. I think Emerson captures it beautifully when he writes, "What must I do is all that concerns me, not what the people think." This rule, equally arduous in actual and intellectual life, may serve for the whole distinction between greatness and meanness. You can feel the power and the conviction in his words.
It's so true. It's like a bolt of lightning, you know? It's direct and electrifying.
It is, yeah. There's no room for ambiguity there.
Now, what about the elegant style? The workbook mentions, pleasing both the fancy and the ear.
Yeah,
I'm picturing something very graceful, flowing.
you're on the right track. Elegance is about striking a balance between beauty and clarity, and this passage comes to mind. He who, in an enlightened and literary society, aspires to be a great poet, must first become a little child. He must take to pieces the whole web of his mind. He must unlearn much of that knowledge which has perhaps constituted hitherto his achieved title to superiority. The language is fluid and graceful, yet the meaning is so precise and insightful.
It's like listening to a beautifully composed piece of music.
Yes,
Every note contributes to the overall harmony.
it does, it does.
And speaking of harmony, I'm drawn to the brief style.
Okay.
This one seems to prioritize conciseness and impact.
Yes, brevity can be incredibly powerful, especially when you want to convey a sense of urgency or despair. And I think Chief Joseph's surrender speech provides a really poignant example of that. He says, tell General Howard I know his heart. I am tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed. Looking Glass is dead. Hulshut is dead. The old men are all dead. It is the young men who say yes or no. He who led on the young men is dead. It is cold and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. Those short declarative sentences create such a stark and moving portrait of their desperate situation.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. It is.
But it's so powerful. Like the simplicity of the language just amplifies the emotional impact.
It does.
Okay, let's kind of contrast that now with the precise style, which
Yeah.
seems to be about choosing words very carefully to ensure absolute accuracy.
Yes, precision is key when you're dealing with, complex ideas or technical subjects. You don't want to leave any room for misinterpretation. So this passage kind of exemplifies that the history of England is emphatically the history of progress. It is the history of a constant movement of the public mind, of a constant change in the institutions of a great society. You see the careful choice of words there.
Oh, yeah.
Emphatically, constant.
Yeah.
The writer's intention is so clear and unambiguous.
It's a style that demands like very careful consideration
It does.
of each word choice.
It does.
Okay, let's explore the copious style.
Yeah.
It sounds like it really embraces abundance and detail.
Yeah, copious style is all about creating a rich and immersive experience for the reader. And Victor Hugo's description of the guillotine is a fantastic example of this. He writes, It, the guillotine, seems as though it were a being possessed of I know not what somber initiative. One would say that this piece of carpenter's work saw, that this machine heard, that this mechanism understood, that this wood, this iron, and these cords were possessed of will. The sheer amount of detail there, it's so vivid and unsettling.
It's like he's bringing the guillotine to life.
He's giving it this eerie sense of agency.
It's a little creepy, but effective.
It is effective. Yeah.
Now, let's shift gears to a style that sounds a bit more relaxed and meandering, the diffuse style.
Okay, so diffuse writing is like a leisurely stroll through a garden, taking in all the sights and sounds. It's characterized by those longer, more descriptive sentences and a willingness to digress. So this passage really captures that essence, I think. The moon was shining brightly, and the stars were out by millions, and the air was warm and still, and the leaves were rustling in the trees, and the water was rippling over the stones, and the birds were singing in the branches. The cumulative effect is one of tranquility and atmosphere.
It's like we're right there with the writer experiencing the scene firsthand.
Yes.
Now, I want to contrast that with the neat style, which seems to prioritize efficiency and clarity.
Yes, neat writing is about conveying information in a straightforward and uncluttered manner.
Okay.
So think of a well-organized presentation
Right.
or concise news report.
Yeah.
And this passage illustrates that the object of this essay is to inquire into the origin of government and to attempt to discover the foundation on which it rests. The writer's intention is clear from the outset, and the language is direct and to the point.
It's a style that really values like precision
It does.
and that economy of language.
It does.
Okay, now let's explore a style that embraces embellishment and ornamentation, the ornamental style.
Okay, so ornamental writing is like a beautifully decorated cake. It's adorned with intricate details and flourishes, and it often employs figurative language, imagery, and elaborate sentence structures to create an aesthetically pleasing effect. So consider this passage. The sun was sinking slowly in the west, and the clouds were tinged with gold and crimson, and the birds were singing their evening hymns, and the air was filled with the perfume of flowers. The writer's use of descriptive language and poetic imagery creates this sense of grandeur and beauty.
It's like we're watching a breathtaking sunset unfold before our eyes.
Exactly, yes.
Now let's talk about a style that's often used for um, comedic or satirical effect, the feeble style.
Okay, so feeble writing is characterized by its weak and ineffective language. It often employs cliches, redundancies, unnecessary wordiness. It's kind of like a deflated balloon, lacking in substance and impact. And here's a passage that really exemplifies that, I think. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. You know, the writer's use of overused phrases, that convoluted sentence structure, it creates a sense of pomposity and absurdity.
It's a style that can be quite entertaining when used intentionally,
It can.
especially like for highlighting those flaws and follies of human nature.
It can.
Now, let's wrap up our exploration of writing styles with one that sounds a bit more free-flowing and informal, the loose style.
Okay, loose writing is like a meandering river. It flows freely, takes unexpected turns. It's characterized by those long, rambling sentences, digressions.
Okay.
And this passage kind of comes to mind. The old man sat on the porch, rocking slowly back and forth, and he thought about his life, and he thought about his family, and he thought about all the things he had seen and done. Those multiple clauses and the lack of a clear structure, it creates this sense of stream of consciousness.
It's like we're listening to the old man's thoughts, as they just kind of wander through his memories.
It is.
And it's a style that can be effective for conveying a sense of introspection or reminiscence. Now, I know we've covered a lot of different styles here. It's important to remember that these are just a few examples.
They are. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to writing. The key is to experiment.
Yes.
Find the styles that best suit your voice and your purpose.
Oh, so well said.
And remember, effective writing isn't just about following the rules. It's about using those rules as tools to create something meaningful and engaging.
And that brings us to another crucial aspect of writing.
Yeah.
Purpose.
Yes.
The workbook breaks down several different purposes, including narration, description, exposition, and persuasion.
Right.
Let's start with narration, which I think of as like the art of storytelling.
It is. It is. Narration is about using language to transport the reader to another time and place, make them feel like they're experiencing the events firsthand.
What are some of the key elements of effective narration? What makes a story truly captivating?
Well, a good narrative needs a clear beginning, middle, and end.
Okay.
It should introduce interesting characters, build suspense, resolve the conflict in a satisfying way. And of course, it needs vivid language and imagery to really bring that story to life.
And the workbook actually provides a helpful template for kind of outlining a narrative.
It does. It does.
It encourages writers to think about the topic sentence, the chronological order of events, the inclusion of descriptive details, and dialogue.
Yeah, it's about planning your story in a way that keeps the reader engaged from start to finish. And don't underestimate the importance of transitions.
Right.
They really help to connect the different parts of your story smoothly and seamlessly.
They're like the glue that holds the story together.
Yeah.
Now, how does description differ from narration? I think I sometimes get those two mixed up.
Okay, so description focuses on creating a vivid picture of a person, place, or thing. It's about using language to appeal to the reader's senses. Make them see, hear, smell, taste, and feel what you're describing.
So it's less about telling a story and more about painting a picture with words.
Exactly.
And just as a painter uses different colors and brushstrokes, a writer uses different words and techniques to create the desired effect.
Exactly.
Okay.
Strong nouns, verbs, and adjectives are crucial for effective description.
I remember the workbook using Dickens's description of Scrooge as a great example. He described him as hard and sharp as flint and said that he iced his office in the dog days.
Oh, that's so vivid.
So vivid, right?
It is. It is.
It creates such a memorable image.
Yes, Dickens was a master of description, and his writing really provides a valuable lesson for any writer who wants to improve their descriptive skills.
It's all about choosing those precise details that create a lasting impression.
It is.
Now let's move on to exposition. What's the primary goal of exposition? I always think of textbooks, informative articles when I hear that word.
Yeah, you're spot on. Exposition is all about explaining. It's about providing information, clarifying ideas, and making complex concepts easier to understand.
So this is the style we'd use for, like, a research paper
Yes,
or a news report.
exactly. And there are several ways to develop an expository paragraph, including definition, analysis, comparison, contrast, and example.
And the workbook stresses the importance of um, including supplementary information to make those subtopics more informative,
Right.
right? It suggests like adding clauses that answer questions like who, what, where, when, why, and how.
Exactly. It's about going beyond simply stating facts and providing the reader with a deeper understanding of the topic.
Okay.
For example, instead of just saying fish cultivators utilize stiff clay lands, you might add, which are not valuable for agricultural purposes,
Right.
to provide that context and explanation.
It's about anticipating the reader's questions
It is.
and then providing those answers within the text. Okay, let's move on to persuasion. What's the key difference between exposition and persuasion? I sometimes struggle to distinguish between the two.
Okay, so exposition aims to inform, while persuasion aims to convince.
Oh, well, wait.
Persuasion is about using language to influence the reader's thoughts and actions,
Right.
get them to agree with your point of view.
So it's the style we'd use for like a debate speech
Yes.
or an editorial.
Exactly. And there are several techniques for effective persuasion, including using logic and reason, appealing to emotion, and establishing credibility.
And the workbook provides a helpful breakdown of the different types of arguments that can be used in persuasive writing, right? It mentions arguing from cause and effect, reasoning from results, drawing comparisons, and using examples.
It does. It does. It's about choosing the most effective strategy for your specific purpose and audience. And remember, persuasive writing needs strong evidence and a clear, logical flow of ideas to be truly convincing.
Well, it feels like we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into the elements of style.
It feels like it, yeah.
We've explored possessives, commas, semicolons. We've tackled comma splices and fragments, untangled those pesky dangling modifiers. We've talked about the importance of sentence variety and paragraph unity, and we've even taken a little journey through a whole landscape of different writing styles and purposes.
We have. It's been quite the adventure so far. And, we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover in this treasure trove of writing wisdom.
There is. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll delve even deeper into the elements of style to help you become a more confident and effective writer.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the elements of style. So far, we've explored those, the building blocks of writing, grammar, punctuation, sentence structure. But now we're venturing into, I guess you could say, the realm of refinement. This is where those, subtle choices can really elevate your writing from good to great.
Oh, I'm ready to level up. What secrets are we unlocking today?
Let's start with the power of positive statements. The workbook, it really emphasizes clear assertions. So instead of saying he was not very often on time, you would say he usually came late.
Okay.
It's about clarity and confidence in your writing.
It's like choosing a strong verb instead of a weak one.
Yes.
Like he sauntered in late, for example,
Yeah.
has a totally different feel than he was not very often on time.
Exactly. You got it. And the workbook also provides some alternatives for some common negative constructions. So forgot instead of did not remember, ignored for did not pay attention to.
Okay.
These small swaps can really invigorate your prose.
I'm making a note of that. I catch myself using those weaker constructions all the time. Speaking of making writing stronger, we keep kind of circling back to the use of definite, specific, concrete language. I'm sensing a theme here.
It's the bedrock of vivid writing.
It is.
Abstract language, it can be, hazy, but concrete language paints a picture in the reader's mind. Imagine saying, he felt happy, versus describing the warmth in his chest, the spontaneous smile spreading across his face.
Right. Those specific details just it makes it come alive. I remember that example from the workbook about making that sentence a period of unfavorable weather set in, more
Yeah.
concrete.
Oh, yes.
It rained every day for a week.
Much more evocative, isn't it? Instead of just this vague notion of bad weather, we have this clear image of relentless rain. That's the power of concrete language.
It really is. It's like replacing a blurry photograph with one that's sharp and in focus. Okay, let's talk figures of speech. I love a good metaphor, but I know it's so easy to go overboard with them.
It is. It is.
The workbook seems to caution against using them too too liberally.
Yes, figurative language, it's like a spice, a dash can enhance the flavor, but too much overwhelms the palate.
That's a good way to put it.
And the key is choosing figures of speech that fit the context organically. Don't force them in where they don't belong.
Yeah, it's like finding the right tool for the job. Sometimes a simple direct statement is more effective than a flowery metaphor.
Exactly. Now, on the topic of efficiency, let's talk about conciseness. I think we're all guilty of using too many words sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. I often find myself like, needing to trim down my sentences after that initial burst of inspiration.
Yeah.
The workbook really emphasizes the importance of, you know, saying what you need to say in the fewest possible words.
It does, because conciseness, it's about clarity and elegance. It's about getting to the heart of your message without sacrificing precision. Do you remember that example about condensing Macbeth's ambition from 51 words down to 26?
Oh, yeah. It's amazing how much tighter that sentence became without losing any of its meaning.
Yeah, exactly.
I need to channel my inner Shakespearean editor more often.
We all do, we all do. Now, speaking of tightening things up, let's talk about avoiding loose sentences. The workbook, it kind of cautions against using too many of them in a row.
Okay, what exactly makes a sentence loose?
It's a sentence where the main idea comes first, and then it's followed by this string of dependent clauses or phrases. Imagine listening to someone tell a story, and they just keep saying, and then, and then, over and over again.
Oh, okay.
It can become tiresome.
Right, yeah, it loses its impact. And the workbook recommends mixing in different sentence structures, including periodic sentences, right?
Yes, periodic sentences, they hold back the main idea until the very end. They kind of create that sense of anticipation, and they add variety and can be really impactful when used, strategically.
So it's all about finding that right balance between loose and periodic sentences to kind of create a flow that feels natural and engaging.
Exactly, yeah. It's like the ebb and flow of a good conversation.
Right. And speaking of flow, let's talk about parallel structure, something the workbook emphasizes, especially when we're, listing items or expressing related ideas.
It is important, yeah.
I always struggle with this one. I know it has something to do with using the same grammatical form, but I often get tripped up.
Yeah, so think about it like creating a visually pleasing pattern.
Oh, okay.
Parallel structure means using the same grammatical form for all the items in a series. So, for instance, she enjoys swimming, hiking, and reading, not she enjoys swimming to hike and reading.
Right.
All those ving verbs create that sense of harmony, make the sentence easier to digest.
It's like the difference between a cluttered room and a well-organized one.
It is, yeah.
Parallel structure brings that sense of order and elegance to our writing.
Precisely. Now, let's tackle a topic that can make or break clarity. Word order.
Oh, word order can be so tricky. I remember those sentences from grade school where you had to rearrange the words to create different meanings. And it really showed how even a small change in word order can completely change the sentence's meaning.
Exactly, yeah. And the workbook, it stresses placing modifiers close to the words they modify to avoid ambiguity. So think about the sentence. He only found 2 mistakes.
Okay.
Does it mean he found only 2 mistakes? Or was he the only one who found 2 mistakes?
It's amazing how much weight that tiny word only carries.
It does. Word placement really is crucial for clear communication.
And speaking of clarity, let's discuss tense.
Yeah.
I think we've all had moments where we've gotten tangled up in tenses while we're writing.
Oh, we have, yeah. It's easy to do.
I sometimes find myself switching between past and present tense without even realizing it. And the workbook really emphasizes using the correct tense and avoiding those unnecessary shifts.
Yes, consistency is key. It's like telling a story where the time keeps jumping around. It disorients the reader, and the workbook actually provides this helpful overview of different tenses and their uses. It also highlights those tricky instances where we need to use the past perfect tense to indicate actions that happened before other past actions.
It's about creating that smooth timeline for the reader to follow.
Okay, let's talk about adding emphasis. The workbook suggests placing key words or phrases in, prominent positions, like at the beginning or the end of a sentence.
Yes, you're highlighting a really powerful technique there.
Oh, good.
The beginning and end of a sentence, they hold the most weight. And by strategically placing keywords in those spots, you really draw the reader's attention to them.
So instead of saying, he walked slowly down the street, we might say, slowly, he walked down the street, or down the street, he walked slowly.
Exactly. It's about making those keywords pop. And remember those periodic sentences we talked about earlier?
Right.
Yeah.
They're another great tool for building emphasis. Delaying the main point until the end creates that sense of suspense, leaves a lasting impact on the reader.
It's like the difference between stating a fact and building up to a grand reveal.
Exactly.
Now, on a slightly more abstract note, let's talk about style. This is where I think things get really interesting. The workbook provides such a fascinating overview of different writing styles, from forcible to feeble, elegant to brief.
It does,
It's
yeah.
amazing.
Style is what gives your writing that unique voice and flavor. Each style has its own personality, its own strengths and weaknesses. And it's about finding the style that best matches your message and your personality as a writer. And the workbook actually encourages writers to study the masters of literature and even imitate their styles as a way of developing their own skill.
Oh, wow. That's a fantastic way to learn.
It is. By immersing yourself in the work of those great writers, you become more attuned to those nuances of language, structure, and tone. It's like an apprenticeship for writers.
Oh, I love that analogy. It makes me want to go back and reread some of my favorite authors with a new eye. Paying attention to how they craft their sentences and paragraphs.
Exactly, yeah. And that's the beauty of studying style. It opens up this whole new level of appreciation for the craft of writing.
It does.
And the more you study, the more you'll develop your own unique voice and style.
Well, I feel like my brain is buzzing with all these new insights.
I know, me too.
We've covered so much ground in this second part of our deep dive. The power of positive statements, the importance of using specific and concrete language, the art of using figures of speech sparingly, the value of conciseness, the ebb and flow of different sentence structures, the harmony of parallel construction, the crucial role of word order, the consistency of tense, and that captivating world of writing style.
You have. It's been an enriching exploration of how those subtle choices can really elevate your writing to a whole new level.
And the journey continues. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll uncover some common errors to avoid and offer those final tips for making your writing truly shine. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the elements of style. We've covered so much ground, from the mechanics of writing to those more nuanced aspects of style and purpose. But now it's time for, I guess you could say, a little bit of cautionary advice. We're going to shine a light on some common writing pitfalls, those little traps that even experienced writers can fall into.
Yeah, think of it as a pre-flight check, making sure everything's in tip-top shape before your writing takes off.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And, I'm always on the lookout for ways to refine my own writing and avoid those little slip-ups that can detract from the message. What's the first pitfall we should be aware of?
Let's talk about those sneaky little qualifiers that can really weaken your writing.
Yep.
Words like very, rather pretty, little. They're like, those extra pieces of furniture cluttering up a room, making it feel less spacious and elegant.
I'm picturing a sentence like, he was very tired.
Exactly.
Instead, we could say he was exhausted. It's about choosing words that carry more weight, more impact.
Yes. The workbook gives this great example of how to eliminate qualifiers in the sentence, all the members were not present. Simply rearranging the words to say, not all the members were present, creates a much more concise and emphatic statement.
Right. Sometimes the simplest changes can have the biggest impact. Okay, what about the word however? I feel like I'm always second-guessing myself when I use that word.
Yeah, however is often misused as a conjunction when it should really function as an adverb. For example, you wouldn't say, he was tired, however, he kept working. Instead, it should be, he was tired, however, he kept working. Remembering those semicolons and commas can really help with this.
Right, yeah. And I also think it's about using however strategically to introduce a contrasting idea or signal a shift in thought.
Absolutely. It's a word that deserves a prominent position in a sentence, not just thrown in as an afterthought. Now, let's talk about something that can make your writing sound a bit too casual. Colloquialisms.
I think of these as comfy, worn-in expressions that we use in everyday conversations, but I know they don't always belong in formal writing.
Right. So colloquialisms are those informal expressions like gonna, wanna, and kinda. They have their place in casual settings, but they can really make your writing sound unprofessional in, more formal contexts.
It's about choosing the right attire for the occasion. You wouldn't wear sweatpants to a job interview, just like you wouldn't use, slang in an academic paper.
Okay, let's tackle a grammatical error that I've definitely been guilty of. Using the wrong pronoun case.
Oh, Pronoun case, it often trips people up. It refers to the form of a pronoun that indicates its function in a sentence. So nominative for subjects, objective for objects, possessive to show ownership. And one common mistake is using me instead of I in compound subjects. For example, you wouldn't say, me and my friend went to the store. It should be, my friend and I went to the store.
Yes, that's a classic example. And the workbook offers a helpful tip. Try removing the other noun or pronoun from that compound subject. If the sentence still sounds right, then you've got the correct pronoun case.
Oh, that's a great trick. I'm definitely going to remember that one. Okay, now let's talk about mixed metaphors. I've always found these kind of amusing, but I know they can be a sign of muddled thinking.
Mixed metaphors happen when you combine two or more metaphors in a way that creates a confusing or even comical image. Imagine saying, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing, but we'll nip that in the bud.
You're mixing wolves and buds. It's like trying to create a hybrid animal. It just doesn't work.
Exactly. When you're using metaphors, stick to one consistent image. Don't switch back and forth, or you'll just end up with a jumbled mess. Now let's talk about a stylistic error that can make your writing seem stale and unoriginal. Using too many cliches. I think we've all been guilty of this one at some point.
Cliches are those overused expressions that have, lost their original punch, like avoid it like the plague or think outside the box. They can make your writing sound so predictable and uninspired.
Yeah, it's like using those pre-made phrases in a text message instead of coming up with your own words.
Right, exactly. Cliches are the fast food of writing. They're convenient, but not very satisfying.
They're not. Challenge yourself to find those fresh and original ways to express your ideas. Now let's talk about a mistake that can make your writing sound pretentious and inaccessible, using jargon.
Oh, right. Jargon is that specialized language that's, specific to a particular field. It can be useful when you're, communicating with colleagues, but it can really alienate readers who aren't familiar with those terms.
Exactly. It's like speaking a different language. And if you're writing for a general audience, stick to clear and concise language that everyone can understand. Now, let's talk about something that can make your writing feel cluttered and disjointed, using too many parentheses.
Parentheses are those little asides we use to, add extra information. But I know they can be so easily overused. It's like interrupting yourself too many times when you're telling a story.
It can be, yeah. And it can make it hard for the reader to follow the main thread of your thought. If the information in parentheses is essential, consider rephrasing the sentence without them. And if it's not essential, well, maybe it can be omitted altogether.
Right. It's about being mindful of the reader's experience and making sure that writing flows smoothly. Okay, let's wrap up our discussion of common errors with a mistake that can really undermine your credibility as a writer: making grammatical errors.
Grammatical errors are like those little cracks in a beautiful vase. They don't completely ruin the object, but they do detract from its overall beauty and integrity.
I know, I always feel a little embarrassed when I spot a grammatical error in my own writing. It's like that feeling when you realize you've been walking around with a piece of spinach stuck in your teeth.
We've all been there. It's why proofreading is so crucial. And, don't be afraid to use a grammar checker. It can be your second set of eyes, catching those little mistakes that you might have missed.
Right, it's like having a trusted friend read over your work before you send it out into the world. Well, I think we've explored a lot of common pitfalls in this final part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
From those sneaky qualifiers and the tricky, however, to the perils of colloquialisms and the importance of using the correct pronoun case, from the dangers of mixed metaphors and cliches to the alienating effects of jargon and the clutter of too many parentheses, and of course the importance of avoiding those embarrassing grammatical errors. It feels like we've really come full circle.
We have. It's been a really comprehensive overview of all those little things that can make such a big difference in the overall quality of your writing.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the elements of style, what's the key takeaway you'd like our listeners to walk away with?
Effective writing is a craft, an art, and a skill that we can continuously refine by studying the principles and the elements of style and being mindful of those common pitfalls that we've discussed. You can really hone your writing and become a much more confident and impactful communicator. And who knows, maybe you'll be inspiring future deep dives with your own masterful writing.
I love that idea. Remember, the journey of writing is a lifelong pursuit. The more you practice, the more you experiment, the more you learn, the stronger your writing will become. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the elements of style. We hope you found it insightful, inspiring, and maybe even a little bit fun. Happy writing.